I hate it when really good horror movies disappear. There are films out there that critics refuse to discuss, and there are films out there that, horror fans have completely missed. Movies with genuinely fascinating ideas that somehow never become a part of the conversation. That really, really frustrates me. So today I want to fix that. These films aren't guilty pleasures. These films aren't so bad, they're good. These are horror films that deserve way more love than they originally received. Some explore grief better than some dramas. Some completely reinvent familiar horror ideas. And one might genuinely be one of the smartest haunted house horror movies I've seen in years. So my name's Ricky. I love horror movies. And here are 8 of the most criminally overlooked horror movies that nobody seems to be talking about. So first up we have The Canal. So The Canal was released in 2014 and was directed by Irish filmmaker Irvin Kavanagh. Now on the surface, this movie sounds fairly familiar. This film archivist starts to suspect that his wife is having an affair. And to make it worse, he uncovers some real disturbing footage connected to a brutal murder that took place in his Victorian home. Now, as his marriage collapses, these strange visions start to consume him, and this leads to him and us as the audience to question what's actually real. Now, here's why I think this movie deserves way more attention. Most haunted house movies ask the question, what's haunting us? Are these ghosts real? But The Canal makes us wonder whether the protagonist's own mind is the thing that's haunting him. I think it's a really fascinating case study on things like jealousy, obsession, suppressed trauma, and also like the unreliable narrator. The film is constantly playing with our mind, right? It's constantly forcing us to question whether these events are actually happening. Is something supernatural actually happening? Or are we just witnessing a guy, snap from reality? And for me, that's what makes it so effective. The ghosts or the supernatural happenings in this film are almost secondary to, everything else that's going on in this guy's life. His paranoia is completely destroying and warping reality around him. Visually, this film is gorgeous. The director shoots the house almost like this living memory, and it utilizes really classic horror techniques like dark corners and, distorted imagery and old film stock. Everything feels contaminated by the protagonist's emotional state. Now, initially, critics were supportive of this film, in particular Rupert Evans' performance, but it really died out after that, which is a shame because I think this is one of the best psychological horror movies of the 2010s. Next up, we have The House Was Not Hungry Then. So this film is probably the newest horror film on this list. It's certainly the most experimental horror movie on this list. Released in 2025, The House Was Not Hungry Then was directed by Harry Aspinwall. The movie centers around this young woman who is searching for her estranged father, and she enters into this sort of like abandoned country house where people disappear and weird things happen. Now, if you read that synopsis or listened to that synopsis, you would think that this kind of sounds like any other sort of haunted house or paranormal mystery, but you would be very, very wrong, because this film isn't really about a haunted house. In this film, the house almost becomes us watching, observing what's happening within inside its own walls. It's one of the few horror movies where the camera itself feels alive. It feels like it was written intentionally into the screenplay, almost like a character. Now, this is going to sound really far out, but this film feels like we're viewing this experience through the consciousness of the house itself, the building itself. Now, director Harry Aspinwall has described the house as representing us saying or refusing to say yes to life. This fear of saying yes to love and allowing somebody into our lives emotionally. It's one of those films that if you go back and revisit and rewatch it again with that in mind, it's a completely different viewing experience, because suddenly this film feels less about entering a scary building and more about emotional vulnerability. In this film, terror comes from opening yourself up to another person. It is a very beautifully tragic metaphor. Don't get me wrong, there are some very, very creepy and even scary moments in this film. It's the type of film where you need to pay attention to everything on screen in case you might miss something even though hardly anything happens in this film, it feels like everything is happening all at the same time. It's incredibly ambitious and I love it for it. Next up we have 2012's The Battery. Now, a little fun fact about myself is I'm not that keen on zombie movies. I love the classics, I was raised on zombie movies. I'm not that in love with modern zombie movies because I feel it's very difficult to do something new. But if somebody asked me for one zombie movie recommendation that feels completely different to every other zombie movie, I would recommend The Battery. This is my favourite zombie film. Directed by Jeremy Gardner, who also stars in this film, it follows these two friends who are wandering through rural America years after this zombie apocalypse. But here's the thing. In this movie, the zombies barely matter. They are kind of background noise. So if you want to watch a zombie movie where it's all just action and fast-paced, maybe this isn't the one for you. But if you want something a bit more methodical and slow, this is one you will definitely want to check out. This is a film about loneliness and grieving a civilization that just isn't there anymore. In the film, we have one guy who completely refuses to let go of the past and another one who is, trying to adapt. Every single conversation between them feels like mourning an entire world. Jeremy Gardner has explained that he wanted this apocalypse to feel like everyday life rather than like constant action, and that decision does make this film feel incredibly human. The soundtrack to this film is also incredible. The dialogue is really well written and the friendship feels authentic. The thing I love the most about this film is simply observing these characters wandering through this life that feels like a ghost, right? They're finding things that remind them of the life that they used to live that they can't get back, and it's so tragic. And even though this is a zombie film, it is a incredibly heartwarming and even funny film at times. Most of the people who I have turned on to this film have fallen in love with it. They adore it now. But nobody seems to talk about this film, which is such a shame because it's such a good methodical look at like what this world would naturally look like. Next up we have the Atticus Institute. So I absolutely love found footage. It's one of my favorite subgenres of horror, but I am tired of seeing the exact same formula repeated, and this is why the Atticus Institute surprised me and why I love it so much. So the film came out back in 2015 and was directed by Chris Sparling. It follows this research facility or institute that is studying people with paranormal abilities, but there is this one patient who starts exhibiting something far more terrifying than just like psychic abilities. Now what makes this movie work for me is that combination of like supernatural and the science. It's something I've always been really fascinated with. I'm not somebody who believes for the most part in anything supernatural, but I want to believe. So testing these abilities under rigorous sort of like scientific conditions is something I've always found quite fascinating. Now in this movie, instead of priests arriving immediately, we get scientists, but we also get like military presence, psychological evaluations and, government documentation. And in this movie, we think, or they think, that possession is something that can be measured, but not just measured, capitalized and weaponized. That is a terrifying thought. It creates this really terrifying atmosphere because everybody is trying to explain something fundamentally impossible. And I think that the found footage really works for this film. I feel like if this was just like your straight standard, horror film, I feel like it's something that we would have seen before. But in this movie, the found footage elements really sells this reality. We've got like this mock documentary presentation where the interviews feel really believable. Archive footage feels authentic and creepy. This is a scary film. It's just a really solid, old-fashioned, supernatural horror movie that deserves way more attention. Honestly, watch this one on your own in the dark and it will scare you. Next up, we have The Cleansing Hour. I think this is one of the most underrated possession horror movies out there. And if, like me, you love possession horror, you absolutely have to watch The Cleansing Hour. It was directed by Damien Levesque and released in 2019. It follows these two friends who fake these live stream exorcisms online. That is until one day a real demon decides to appear on a live broadcast. It sounds mental, because it is. This film has some of the best possession scenes I've seen in any kind of modern possession horror film for a really long time. It's brutal, it's relentless, and it's also a really funny film. But underneath all the demonic chaos, this film is actually satirizing like influencer culture. It's tackling themes like, you know, fake authenticity and performative religion and internet celebrity. And I think one of the biggest themes in this film is irony. These two friends spent their entire lives believing that evil wasn't real, only to discover that it absolutely is way too late. But what might surprise you the most about this film is how seriously this movie eventually takes possession. Once things start to escalate, this film really commits, man. The practical effects are brilliant in this film, and the performances are surprisingly emotional. It stars an actor that most people know from horror films. He's one of them sort of actors that just pops up here and there in films, and I think rightfully so, he is starting to get a bit bigger. Carl Gallner, I think he is fantastic in this film. He was in another horror film that came out, was it last year, called Strange Darling, which I absolutely loved. I think he's fantastic. He is fantastic in this film too. Now, if you love possession horror movies and you want to see one that does things a little bit different, check this one out. It's fun, it's chaotic, and ultimately it's just a good, entertaining horror film that more people should talk about. Next up we have Severance. Now, do not get this film confused with the TV show Severance. Two completely different things. Now, if you haven't seen the film Severance, the best way I can describe this film to you is imagine The Office meets the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. The film was released all the way back in 2006 and was directed by Christopher Smith. The film centers around these employees who go away on this corporate team building retreat, and it goes catastrophically wrong. This film is hilarious, like belly laugh, hysterically funny, and that is unusual for me. I am not usually the type of person who is into horror comedies. I like my horror films to have a bit of comedy here and there, because I think that horror, or that feeling of being scared and hysterical laughter, they come from the same place. So when you can use them both that way, it works really well. But horror films that are being marketed as horror comedies, they never usually land for me. But this one is different, because this one is also incredibly brutal. And Christopher Smith manages to somehow balance outrageously funny moments with some really horrific and brutal gore scenes. I think that the corporate satire genuinely still lands today. If you've ever worked in an office, you will really enjoy this film, I think, because it takes things like office politics and, you know, meaningless team building exercises and corporate greed, and it filters it through this like really outrageous bloody slasher film. It's one of those rare horror comedies for me where both sides of this film just work. The comedy lands and the kills land. And I feel like sometimes when films try to do this, either one side undermines the other, and you don't get that here. Both sides work with each other. I genuinely don't understand why this film isn't mentioned alongside other horror comedies like Shaun of the Dead or Dale and Tucker vs. Evil, because for me, I personally preferred this than both of them films. Oh, the film also stars a young Danny Dyer, so, you know, it's got that going for it too. Next up we have Landmine Goes Tick. So this is probably going to be the hardest watch on this list. Released back in 2015, it was directed by Levan Bakir. It begins with an American tourist who accidentally stands on a live landmine whilst out on a hike. And from there on, it turns into this incredibly intense psychological, like survival thriller that goes incredibly hard. It's very difficult to watch and very brutal. So this film divided people massively. Some people really criticized it for being too shocking or overly shocking, while other people really praised it for that exact same reason, for being uncompromisingly unflinching. Now, what surprised me the most about this film, and I guess the thing that I loved the most about this film, wasn't just how shocking and disturbing it is, but how quickly civilization disappeared here. Power shifts and morality completely collapses, and the only thing that's important is survival. This is a deeply unpleasant film to watch, man. There are certain scenes in this film that are relentless and could just completely refuse to blink. It's also a film of, I guess, two halves. The first half of this film is this kind of like single location survival thriller, but then it kind of like blooms into something much bigger, and it just kept me on edge the entire way through. It kept me guessing all the way through. Sure, the acting in parts of this film isn't great, but the story is enough to get you through. And honestly, just it's such a bleak film. The way this film ends is so shocking. It will not be a film that everybody will like. It's not even going to be a film that a lot of people will be able to, make it through. But horror shouldn't always just be entertainment, I don't think. And sometimes we have to be confronted with things we don't want to see. We have to be challenged by films sometimes, and I think that's exactly what this movie does. It's not for everybody. Be warned going in. It is a lot. And finally, we have Wormtown. Lock in, because this film is wild. It is bizarre. Released in 2025, it centers around a town that has been completely taken over by this parasitic worm infestation. The film follows these survivors who are living inside this increasingly cult-like community, a community where the infection has become both religion and social order. So this is a really gnarly body horror film, but it's not simply about body horror. It's a film about conformity. It's a film about surrendering individuality and this frightening comfort of belonging to something bigger than yourself, or a reality bigger than yourself. The parasite almost becomes ideology, and accepting infection means you're accepting, certainty, and rejecting it means isolation. Now, there is an awful lot wrong with this film. There are times where it's slow and it drags and the acting can be a bit spotty here and there, but everything I've just explained to you is something that I find very fascinating, and especially when applied to this exact narrative. And the reason I've included this film on this list is because it's a perfect example of taking something so bizarre and unusual and using it to represent very real world anxieties, fears and problems. And that's one of the things I absolutely love about horror the most. I love that horror can do this. Now, this film is packed with some of the gnarliest, disgusting body horror I've seen in any modern body horror film. Honestly, if you ever fear of bugs and worms, this film is not going to be for you, because it is graphic. But underneath all of that, this is a unsurprisingly thoughtful exploration of identity and free will and cult psychology. I don't think it's perfect, but I think it's far more interesting than what a lot of people say it is or think this movie might be. Now, for me as a horror fan, one of the best things about being a horror fan is just discovery and discovering new horror films. Some of my favourite films of all time have never topped the box office, have never won awards, been nominated for awards, or even get talked about online. And I've personally found the best horror films aren't necessarily the ones that people are actually talking about. Some of the best horror films that I've ever seen, I've found, secondhand in charity shops or at the bottom of a bargain bin of, straight to DVD release horror films. I love finding a horror film that nobody talks about and just falling in love with it. So if you've seen any of these horror films, let me know in the comments below which one you think deserves more love. If you have your own overlooked horror movie recommendations, drop it below, because I'm always looking for new horror movies that deserve more attention. If you enjoyed this video, consider liking it, sharing it with a friend. Your likes and shares and comments, they really help this channel grow. We're going to be releasing at least 2 videos like this a week, so if you like horror movie recommendations, horror movie deep dives, disturbing movies, disturbing documentaries, hit the subscribe button and also hit the notification button so you don't miss out on any videos I post. You can also find me on TikTok, on Instagram, and on Facebook, where I upload videos every single day. There are thousands of horror movie recommendations on all of my socials, so if you ever need an idea of what to watch tonight, head over to my socials. There will be something for you to find. As always, thank you to everybody who watches these videos, who likes, who comments, who shares. You really do help us grow this channel. We're trying to get to 5,000 followers by the end of the month. Let's get there. Be good to yourselves, be good to other people, and I'll see you soon.